Welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to the SoCal TBA 2020 webinar. Yeah, I see that 50 of us has shown up already, so that's great. And if you cannot hear me, please just make a comment in the event chat, and then we will try to resolve any technical difficulties. And yeah, so first of all, like this event is sponsored by TECO, that stands for Taipei Economic and Cultural Office in Los Angeles. So yeah, so for the first 3 to 5 minutes, we would like to present to you the TECO director, Jiayuan Chen, to give a just opening remark.
Yes. Hello. Anyone can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm sorry, I need to wear my mask because I'm in the office now. Good morning, everyone. I'm Professor Chen from the Ministry of Science and Technology. We call MOST of Taiwan. It is my great honor to be here to give you a few words in the beginning of today's webinar. So, as you may know, that one of the major missions of MOST, the Ministry of Science and Technology in Taiwan, we are here to enhance the collaboration between the US and Taiwan in terms of the technology advancements, and especially in the field of biomedical engineering. Myself is also a professor that is focused on the human circulation as well as the cardiovascular diseases. So we will do everything in our capacity to help with the collaboration by means of the funding support and also the program management. So if you have any idea or if you need any help to facilitate this collaboration, please let us know. We will do our best to help. Also, I want to take this opportunity to thank the first presenters for today's webinar. Thank you so much for attending today's event. Also, my personal thanks to Tony Yan and his team to organize this nice progress. I hope you all will enjoy today's meeting. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Director Chen. Also, just as a quick tutorial to all the attendees, on the right panel, you should see a Q&A panel, so that when you click into it, you can start typing in your question. And if you see existing questions that echoes your thought, you could always put your vote toward that question. And in the end of for the end of the event, we will go through all the Q&A and then pick popular and relevant questions for the speakers to answer. Yeah, and yeah, I think that will be it. And let's let the speakers or the panelists to introduce themselves. First one, let's have Li Fan. Li Fan, please take it away.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. My name is Li Fan Lu. I'm now an associate professor at UCSD in the Division of Biological Sciences. Originally, I came from Taiwan as well, and then I came to US about 20 years ago. Almost 20 years ago, not yet, to get my PhD degree, did my postdoc training, and then moved from New York to San Diego back in 2011, where I started my own laboratory here at UCSD. And my research focus is immunology, particularly immune regulation. Even though I don't necessarily have a lot of experience working with COVID, but I will be happy to answer some questions related to COVID as much as I can today. I guess that's pretty much it. If you have more questions, I can answer later. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Li Fan. Jesse, would you be able to introduce yourself? Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello, can you
Yes.
hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So hello everyone, and thanks Tony and the organization for the opportunity representing BioLegend in participating in this event. So I'm also originally from Taiwan. My research background is molecular biologist or later immunologist. And my industry background has been focusing on the development and commercialization of reagent and tools serving the life science application from research to therapeutics. So I joined BioLegend last year and currently act as VP of Research and Product Development. BioLegend is a private-owned company, was first established in 2002, almost 18 years ago, by Jing Lei. So Jing is our current CEO and president, and he was also originally from Taiwan. The company currently has more than 600 employees worldwide, and we service the global market by providing the reagent and tool, including recombinant protein, antibody, immunoassay, and proteogenomic kits. So our business is really reflecting the company mission, which is supporting legendary discovery that leads to cure. So I'm happy to share how we at BioLegend manage the risk and as well as the opportunity in responding to the pandemic. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Jesse. Julio, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Tony, and thank you, Tesco, for sponsoring the event. It's a pleasure to be in front of the California Taiwanese Biotech Association, especially out here in SoCal, where we're based. I'm a biochemist by training. I spent a lot of my time at the wet bench, as well as a computational chemist, and so worked with a lot of in silico modeling simulation tools for drug discovery. Took about a 15-year journey in industry, everything from early stage R&D to clinical, and then on the manufacturing side for FDA regulated companies, which was about the time I decided to get an MBA and start Lab Fellows. I'm the CEO and founder of Lab Fellows. We started in 2014. We create solutions to help lab operators gain visibility and control over the labs from anywhere. On the software side of the business, we've got about 2,400 companies utilizing our lab management software. And it also powers about 33 accelerators and incubator spaces across the country, including our 33rd one here in partnership with UCSD at the Center for Novel Therapeutics in La Jolla. I'm also on the advisory board for UPS in their healthcare logistics, as well as on the board of a couple other accelerators and companies here locally in town. And I'm looking forward to talking to everybody, as far as any interest in their journeys getting in the industry, and specifically during the pandemic, how we've helped some of the labs really completely stay operational during COVID. I think that's been a challenge, not only operationally, but safety as well. So I'm excited to share what we learned and what we continue to learn as we try and navigate this pandemic.
All right. Thanks, Julio. All right. Looks like David is running a little bit behind. So I guess we can proceed to questions. And then once David joins, we can have him introduce himself and then proceed with the following question. And let's get started. So first question, let me just make sure I have the text available for everyone to see as well. 301. So the first question, when did your organization or company start to respond to the pandemic? Is it before or after the government announced shelter-in-place order? Or if it's before the shelter-in-place order, what was the trigger for your organizations or company to take action? Thank you. We will start with, let's start with Jesse.
About Legend, we actually start planning how to respond to the pandemic month ahead, the way before the government shelter-in-place order occurs. And this is mainly due to, as I mentioned earlier, that Jing was originally from Taiwan. So his Taiwanese background actually really have him foresee the potential pattern is going to occur COVID-19 and also the potential risk associated with that. So he actually initiated the executive weekly, if not daily meeting to start the plan, what we think could occur. And also we put a plan in place and continue to adjust as the situation change. So that is specifically more towards a BioLegend situation in planning ahead, foresee what is going to occur regarding the COVID-19.
All right, thanks, Jesse. Julio, please go ahead. I know like David just joined, so very nice. And then we'll have David kind of answer toward the last, and then he can do his introduction as well. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Tony. Yeah, so the pandemic, it was interesting. I remember where I was when we first heard Governor Newsom's orders to stay at home. That was on a Friday. As soon as we had actually been anticipating it and had just finished relocating, consolidating several offices, our downtown one to ours in North Torrey Pines. And I remember, as a team, we really huddled and worked throughout the weekend to really understand what this all meant for us. We landed on, understanding that we were part of their critical infrastructure, and with a lot of the biotechs dependent on our services to continue to further their progress, we had to really figure that out. And so I think initially we just reacted in the early days as we returned back to our offices. So most of our team, is remote. We do have some personnel who are on premise with some of our customers. And so, in the early days, a lot of the organization was reacting. And for us, we triaged it to making sure the supply chains remained open. So for us, part of the supply chain are the labs and the real estate and the infrastructure. And we knew that if labs couldn't operate, then they would shut down. If they could, if they shut down, then the ability for us to help their operations goes away. And so we really started to set up a few command centers. So we set up a tool to help communicate the suppliers on the material side, letting customers know if the suppliers have any kind of disruption, so they can anticipate how that impacts their business. Access to materials, some of the limited reagents that started to become real crucial in developing a lot of these COVID diagnostics and testing. And then really started to leverage our infrastructure. Our lab software powers many labs, and what that means is we were able to put together a consortium where we could look into some of the data and help out with some of the early firefighting on that supply chain constraint. I remember at one time the cotton swabs in those tests became a limiting material, and so we partnered up with a lab at UCSD that was 3D printing some of those cotton swabs, and they needed to be able to sterilize that to get them to the hospitals. And so we pitched in and were able to source, looking across the inventories of our customers and working with that data collective to find out excess capacity and really match that need there. And so that was kind of the reaction, was kind of our early part into the COVID-19. And then we really started to focus on how to help the broader biotech community reopen. And so that really started off with trying to figure out from an environmental health and safety perspective how this was going to be done. And so started to put some protocols, looking at the different changing CDC guidelines and really deciding universally how that might apply to both shared. As you can imagine, one thing is to have an operations of one company, but imagine our accelerators and incubators we work with, they have several dozen companies under one roof. And so really worked on building tools that gave them visibility into who was in the lab. And then recently, over the last few months, we've been accelerating what that means. So providing tools where they have visibility and control of who has access to the labs remotely, and minimizing the critical few who actually need to be in the lab. And so we really developed some abilities to maintain access control, who should have access to what parts of the lab remotely, and then started to build tools that allow the lab operators to do as much as they could from home, so that was really just the scientists and the minimum amount of lab operators that you needed in the lab who were actually physically going in, under the hypothesis that if you can reduce headcount, that has a significant impact of being able to minimize the exposure and risk of folks coming in and out of the facility who may be exposed to COVID-19. That in a nutshell, that's really what we've been working on as far as responding to this pandemic.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Julio. That's very insightful. Li Fan, please go ahead.
Yeah, so in terms of the question, like when UCSD start to respond to the pandemic, I think for UCSD is kind of unique, is because we have not just the research component, but also the major part of UCSD is obviously undergrad teaching. And that is critical because we have a lot of students on campus. And for example, in the lecture I was teaching in the spring quarter, we have about 200 students. So and we have even larger classes in other in other courses, like some of them can reach to 600 students in one classroom. So that's why the school actually responded earlier before the government announced shelter-in-place order. But it's not too early, obviously, because this is a big decision to make. It influenced so many people. So I think in terms of the teaching part, we started probably a week or 2 weeks before the shelter-in-place order was placed. We already been asked to move our teaching to the remote teaching lecturing style using Zoom. And it also took a while for us, obviously, especially if you consider not just giving lecture, but also having midterm exam, final exam, and everything need to be done remotely. It wasn't an easy transition, to say the least. So we have this transition phase when we were asked to start to do all the lecturing virtually, and people try to figure out how to carry their final exam, because that was in the end of the winter quarter. So the final exam was just a couple of weeks away. So it wasn't really easy, but that's how we responded. In terms of research, that I would say that probably started when the shelter-in-place order was placed, because in a way it's relatively in a much smaller scale, right? So the people you have in the lab is definitely not comparable to hundreds of students in the classroom. But I would say that's basically what happened during that time, is the school really responded quickly in terms of undergrad teaching, even though there's a difficult transition phase, and the research followed. And that's the answer for this question.
All right, thanks, Li Fan. It seems that there's definitely a lot of disruption in both teaching and research. David, I've messaged you the questions, so please feel free to let me know if I need to repeat it with the audience. But please go ahead and pitch in your thought on this question, and then maybe we can start with the introduction if you would like. Thanks.
Okay, absolutely. And I apologize for being late. Just my bad, and just really happy to be here. Thanks for the invitation. Let me just tell you a little bit about Boyce Thompson Institute. It's a standalone independent research institute. It's a not-for-profit, kind of like Cold Spring Harbor, Salk, Scripps, that sort of a model. And we're located on the Cornell University campus, which often creates confusion with people. But we have our own endowment, our own human resources. We're not a teaching unit of Cornell. We have graduate students. They're from Cornell. We have our own postdocs, our own technicians, our own faculty, and so on. And we all have adjunct appointments at Cornell. So we have a relationship with Cornell, but it doesn't involve money, which is probably a good thing right now. I've been at BTI my whole career postdoc. That is to say, 31 years. I've been president for about half of that, accidentally, I might add. I was president for the 2008 financial crisis, and I thought that was my crisis. Now I got another one. So I'm the two crisis president of Boyce Thompson Institute. BTI was founded by a person named Boyce Thompson, who wasn't a scientist, but he was worried about the sustainability of society, particularly the food security. So he founded it on the belief that basic research was going to be the key to food security in the future. Now, this was back in 1924, so we're about 100 years old. Of course, that what he thought then is true just as much or even more today. However, BTI is not only a plant research institute. We have worked with nematodes, we have worked with cell lines, and so on. So we're diverse, but we're small, and we're independent, which we really love. Although I will, as I'll say in a moment, with COVID, you can't be completely independent because we're on the Cornell campus. So that's my introduction. And as far as the question goes, you have to remember that New York was really, after Washington State, was really ground zero in the United States for COVID. I mean, we got hit hard and we got hit early. So back in March, it was kind of like we were standing in a tunnel and we saw a light and we didn't know if it was the other end of the tunnel or it was a train. And it turned out to be a train, and that train came real fast. So one day, I was picking up my son from school, and the next day we were shut down. It was really that quick. So we didn't, we read the paper, but we were in that early exponential growth phase of coronavirus where there was a handful of cases around the country. The president said it was going to go away. And then all of a sudden, New York was saying, we need a ship, we need a new hospital, we need ventilators in the thousands or tens of thousands. And so we went from open to shut in a really an incredibly short period of time. Now, when I say shut, the governor of New York, who's been quite a television personality during the pandemic, declared certain businesses to be essential, and ours was one. So research was considered to be essential for the purpose of preserving samples. So, for example, we had transgenic plants. We didn't have to throw them away. We were allowed to take care of them. If we had cell lines that needed liquid nitrogen, we were allowed to give them liquid nitrogen. But basically, it was de minimis. We had a few people who were allowed to come into the building and take care of things, and everybody else was obviously working remotely. So New York, of course, got hit early, but also came back early, and we've been into various phases of reopening. Right now, we have about 50% occupancy allowed. People who feel they can't be productive remotely are allowed, even if they're not lab people, are allowed to request time in the office. So, we're certainly not where we used to be. And I think we miss a lot, which I'm sure we'll talk about later in terms of the interpersonal interactions, the things that lead to inspiration, and so on. But we're operating, we got a big piece of the PPP money, that payroll protection program that kept us from having to lay people off, which was a huge thing. We're still trying to protect our employees as best we can. It's really challenging because our endowment got hit, just like all the university endowments. It costs money for PPE rather, personal protective equipment, and things are just not as efficient. It's harder to operate this way. So we've had a lot of budget adjustments, but we've managed to avoid layoffs, which Cornell has not. So we've been lucky. Our income stream is very different than Cornell's. We don't depend on tuition, summer programs, things like that. So they've been cutting salaries and cutting jobs, and we've managed to hold the fort so far. But of course, we don't know if there'll be a second wave and what it'll look like if there is. The students have just started coming back. Cornell is one of the universities that's trying to stay open. And my understanding is from early reports, the students are not very well behaved, at least some of them. They never are before classes start, but this would be the year when they were supposed to grow up. I'm afraid that isn't happening. So I don't know how long we stay open for, but we're going to enjoy it while we can. And I think I'll leave it there.
All right. Thanks, David. Since now, well, just so everyone know, this event is recorded. Since now we have everyone kind of here, so might be a good time to take a screenshot. Let's see. Might be a good time for our sponsors to, turn on your video so you can be taken with a screenshot. All right. I'll wait for 10 seconds to see if they would like to be in a picture. Yeah, Michelle is there. Okay. On three. 1, 2, 3. Oh, I got it. I got it now. All right. All right. Okay. So that was done with the screenshot. We can. Okay, I wasn't on, but it's okay. Time for the next question. So let me post the question real quick. I feel like some of us addressed the question already. So if you feel like you've addressed the second question, then please feel free to just express that, and we can move on to the next speaker. And if all of you feel like you've addressed it, then I can just move ahead. But here's the question. What are the main changes in your organization or company that are crucial to workplace safety? So maybe what are the changes you're from way before to now, right? What's the current standard? And the first one on deck would be David.
Okay, thank you. I won't take much time with this. I think the changes we've made are like everybody else's. Of course, it's density, it's controlling who gets into the building, and it's masks, it's sanitation, all of those things, and of course communication. And we've gone for a long time now. We've had a weekly webinar. We have a reopening committee, we call it. So it's an internal committee. We spend a lot of time on communication because we have to follow state mandates. We have to follow what Cornell does. We have to make our own decisions on risk management. So we are doing all those things to avoid, that persons would come into the organization, into the building, and pass code from one to another, and that we know who's coming in. So it's, we don't allow in undergraduates from Cornell, for example, or visitors right now. So this, I think, is normal. I think one of the big questions is how much to invest in things like plexiglass dividers or virtual technologies and things like that. In other words, how long is this all going to last? And when you start making infrastructure changes, this is where the real money goes. So we're playing this guessing game right now with, we want to invest in things that we'll want for the long term. And I think that's really our assessment right now. But so far, everybody generally feels good about, the surveys tell us people feel comfortable working there. They feel as comfortable as they feel like they could hope to feel. And of course, if they don't feel that safe there, they don't have to come in. Although, again, we have to start changing that policy in the near future because of the consequences of not being in the office for some people's jobs. But that's another question. So I think I will leave it there.
All right. Thanks, David. Julio, please go ahead.
Hey, Tony. Yeah, I'll get into, I think, practically speaking, we all have seen the SOP and the guidelines, right, with social distancing, wearing the masks. We've started to really implement technology that helps us to manage that density. For example, we have built out a portal where our labs are able to reserve not only conference rooms, as some may be used to, but even desks and benches and equipment so that we can actually start to plan out the experiments that are planned out for the week and know, what capacity we have so that scientists can really start to plan out their workflows and coordinate so we can have a multi-user, workflow type of environment going on. The same technologies, we started to integrate some of the access control systems that are kind of linked to the reservations. So, you walk up to the lab door. As long as you have authority, you actually don't even bring out a key card reader. You actually bring out your phone or your hand, and you just wave it, and it unlocks Open Sesame, and they're able to go straight to the bench and get going on the work. One of the cool things we have too is being able to, for density, remove more and more of the lab operations that you physically need to be on site for. And so what we've done is married that access control system with some of the cameras. So we have 4K HD cameras mounted all over inside of the laboratories, and that allows us to actually have the team remotely. Air gas may come in with some CO2 to bring into the tissue culture suite. They can actually walk up to the doorbell, wave, be remotely let in if they're expected, and actually be guided virtually by one of the virtual assistants there into where in the TC suite it is. They drop off the gas and leave a work order on the desk. So we've been really virtualizing a lot of the aspects of the lab operations, which has been great because that means that that threshold, that capacity for who can be in there becomes more and more slanted towards the scientists who are doing the work versus some of the back office stuff. And we've also implemented a mobile app, and with the mobile app, we're able to have the communication between those in the lab and those outside. So, for example, if a scientist receives a package, they can, in the application, take a picture of the package, and then someone remotely can deal with the shipping and the receiving and paying the invoices for the vendors. So a lot of this remote lab technology we've been starting to build out so we can continue to help companies safely return to the lab.
All right, yeah, it's very exciting for all the new technologies can really enable us to weather through this pandemic. Thanks, Julio.
Yeah, Tony. I was going to say, Tony. One of the things that was pretty interesting as we were getting that CNT project at UCSD off the ground was all of UCSD at the beginning of the epidemic actually shut down. We had lots of investigators, not just the startups, but even the investigators who reached out and said, "Hey, I'm on campus. I can't get to my lab. I can see it, but I can't go in." And we were able, because we could safely keep things fully operational, we're able to help some of those experiments continue on, especially those related to developing the fast tests and some of the assays for some of the COVID-19 testing.
Yeah, thanks, Julio. Yeah, personally, I'm very excited because I go into the lab too, so it might be helpful if I can remote some of my wet lab work as well. Okay, Li Fan, please go ahead and chip in.
Yeah, so as Julio briefly mentioned, at UCSD, we really don't have those high technology, right, to help us to do all this kind of things to ensure workplace safety. So we do it in a more traditional way, just to cut down, the need to come to the workplace to right now at the level what we are in, right, we call orange phase, right? So since June 1st, we moved from red phase to orange phase, and that allowed a certain level of workforce come back to work. But in the end of the day, is what we're doing is just, we try to keep social distancing. We try to make sure that in the regulation is 250 square feet per person. So essentially just avoid human contact, essentially, right? So it just, for every bay, you can only have one person. For every office, you can only have one person. So for any even common area like the kitchen area, when people have usually heat up their lunch, or the restroom, we only have one person per area, each time. So essentially that's just what we do, is just to make sure you don't have people around you in the close proximity, and that's the downside of it's safer, but the downside is like you really don't have much interaction at all, right? So every meeting we have to be done remotely. Even when people are working in the lab, they cannot meet directly. They have to meet remotely. So even when we have lab meeting, we at the time we have people in the lab, we still do the Zoom meeting. So that's just what we do. And in terms of teaching, I said earlier already, everything is done remotely as well. So essentially what we do is just to make sure, beside all the, the masks that you have to wear, all the protection gear you have to have, I think the key thing is just to avoid human interaction. So wherever you are, you definitely, you're there by your own, and everyone shouldn't get closer to you. And that's just what we do.
All right, thanks, Li Fan. Since very much like my PhD life of no interaction. Anyway, let's go to Jesse. Jesse, what's your thought on this?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, the BioLegend's business is really supporting the critical reagent and tool for the life science application. This, of course, including the infectious disease research and the vaccine research and development. So we know from the beginning that we are considered as essential business, and we almost have to stay fully operational. And that's why we really have to plan ahead. So we don't really have the luxury to say that you can stay at home, especially for the laboratory, manufacturing, and logistic people. So, but fortunately, we decided to plan, put a lot of planning activity in place, and also according to the plan, the company did invest quite a bit from managing the inventory and putting the right infrastructure to ensure the safe environment. So in fact, we know that we almost have to maintain at least more than 80%, if not 100% capacity. We do need to ensure the staff can come to the site and work safely. So the executive team under the leadership of Jean, we update our 2020 organization OKR to be COVID-19 free campus. So for that, the team actually really work together and adjust to the new normal, including we have to put in 2 shifts, for example, to adjust the personnel density. And most importantly, the executive support to put a lot of mandatory policy and practice even ahead or beyond the CDC guideline. For example, daily temperature check. So all the employees, before they come to work, they actually have to make sure they do the daily temperature check, for example. And as long as you step into the campus, wearing mask is mandatory. So this is all being enforced at the early time. I think really contribute to we will be able to deliver more than 80% and close to 100% capacity, and while keep all the employees safely working in the BioLegend campus. And of course, all the other activity change is quite similar to the previous panelists mentioned. But I think the key thing is start from the top. We determined to deliver and still have the COVID-19 free campus. So people really sacrifice and adjust to support that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Really appreciate for all the essential workers that really support us through this pandemic and still working now. And I believe the biotech community will be very, very appreciative of BioLegend's persistent and work throughout this period. So yeah, thanks everyone. Let's go on to our next question, which I think some of us, I think it's a spectrum depending on which company you are, but what is the percentage of people working from home versus working in the lab? How do you communicate with your team while practicing social distancing? Or perhaps how do you achieve effective communication while practicing social distancing? And then the first we will have Julio. please take us ahead.
Sure, thanks, Tony. Yeah, I think I covered a lot of this in my other answers, so I'll be brief here. But I think technology has been really key. I think maybe 10 years ago this would have been very expensive technology, the kind that a company might be thinking about investing 6-7 figures into. Now the technology is so accessible, it literally costs the cost of their Starbucks latte now to get this going. So about $6-8 a month, every user on our platform is able to enjoy things like being able to use a mobile application to reorder some of the chemicals and reagents, to be able to communicate with their shipping and receiving colleagues to accept the packing slip, or to your accountants, right, letting you know, hey, we did receive this piece of equipment, it was installed just fine, no scratches, go ahead and pay the supplier on those invoices. And so the communication stream has been going this way. Even pre-epidemic, you saw a digital transformation occurring, and I think COVID-19 has really accelerated that. And I think we're very fortunate to see that going. And for us, it was pretty much luck, because on helping incubators and accelerators, in the beginning of 2020, we had already been making efforts on the technology side to start to figure out the remote lab management capabilities. And the goal there was, how could we help to really support automation of the lab operations? And so we were doing that from the economic perspective. If you had less operators operating these incubators and accelerators, the overhead costs would be lower, so you could actually reduce the barriers to entry for a startup to begin to run their company. And so just by sheer luck, it turns out those same technologies were able to be repurposed for an academic or a pandemic kind of post-COVID-19 world, where we're all thinking about how do we keep people to continue to do their jobs safely, and for many of them remotely. So we right now do balance a lot of our facilities around 50%, and then we share that same technology we developed for the incubators and accelerators to the larger companies. So we've been working with a lot of companies who are in kind of this warp speed project going on with the government, where they are accelerating therapeutics and potential COVID candidates in phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials. And so a lot of those companies have started to take the technology and use it to accelerate what they're doing, both in the clinic as well as at the bench.
All right, thanks, Julio. Very exciting. Well, I think the technology play has done very well, for sure. Li Fan, please go ahead and give us your thought on this.
Yeah, so in terms of percentage, based on the rule, the orange phase that we have at UCSD right now is supposed to be 25% research activity in the lab. It means that in theory, 75% of people should stay at home, 25% work at the lab. But this is kind of the more like a superficial number, but more a real number is what I said earlier, is the real kind of the regulation is you can have one person per bay, or one person for every 250 square feet. So that's the regulation. So essentially that's the guideline, and the university asked us to submit a plan, the research plan. Basically, you have to tell them that you have to have a footprint of your lab space, so you know how much space you have, how many bay you have in the lab, and how many people you have in the lab, and how are you going to assign those people to those areas. So that, with that said, you can imagine that having a big lab can be impacted the most. When I say big lab, it means a lab with more people, right? Because the lab space is not going to be so different, right? I mean, obviously, certain labs are bigger than other labs, but in terms of the actual footage, it's not as different as the number of people in the lab. So I would say probably the big lab will get impacted more, and they have to take shift because they just cannot have, most of the people show up at the same time. And in my lab, is relatively affected in the more kind of smaller scale is because I don't have that many people in the lab. I can still manage to have most of the people be able to come to a lab to do their research. However, still under the current regulation, we have to plan the experiment better in terms of, because still we cannot have everybody show up at the same time. So we just have to coordinate better by either using a Zoom meeting or just email communication. Again, we don't have the high tech, but still, I think what we do right now, the solution we're taking, at least I'm taking right now for my lab, is weekly. Right now, I ask the people in my lab to submit their weekly experimental plan to me. So during the weekend, they will send me their experimental plan for the next week, and then I will go through those experimental plan with them, to prioritize what are the important, what are less important, and then to make sure like everyone is able to, do their work under the current regulation. So I would say, you just need to have a better planning. So in a way, maybe the research activity is limited, but people can learn how to plan their experiment more, in a more efficient way. So that's maybe something, you can learn, you can get from the current pandemic, is you just have to be more efficient. And that's what we do in the lab right now.
Yeah, I think definitely makes you try to be very effective in your communication and try to figure out how to best use your time. I definitely see that. And Jesse, please give us your thought on this.
Yeah, I think it's quite similar in biology, other than the lab people, manufacturing, logistics, like I mentioned earlier, that we do have to come into work. But in terms of administrative supporting personnel and personnel that involved more on the commercial side, such as marketing and sales, that's about, I would say, 20-30% of the personnel in BioLegend can stay at home, but they actually take turn to come into to the organization on site. And the rest of the 70-80% of the personnel, they do have to work on site, but then they will take a turn in terms of the shift. So some people would do 50% of people come in the early morning and work until early afternoon, and then the second shift comes in. So how do we keep the communication effectively? Similar, we use the technology, but again, we still host a lot of in-person meeting. So we will arrange the meeting in the bigger conference room. And I think most importantly is due to our mandatory wear mask policy. I think that really make people feel comfortable, and also at the same time be able to communicate in person. And so I forgot to mention that the BioLegend also provide a free mask for our employees that are working on site. So all this policy that the organization put in place, I want to emphasize that beyond the CDC guideline and beyond all the government guideline, really help us to effectively deliver and also effectively communicate. So I know that the technology is essential, but I do feel like the in-person communication still play a very significant role at BioLegend. So this the safety feature or social policy really help us on that.
Thanks. Looks like passing out masks is working, so that's great. David, please give us your thought.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add. I would say, we have the lab maps. We have, remote work plans for everybody. I think the difficulty really is some people don't really want to go into work and because they don't feel safe or because they have childcare issues and these sorts of things. How do you balance people's life needs? Usually we say, your home stays at home and work goes to work, but I think we really have to think holistically about people's lives right now. You don't want all the people with no children to be forced to come into the workplace, even if they don't feel safe, but you also want to be understanding of the pressures that people have on their lives. So we're trying to do this on a case-by-case basis to really be sensitive to people's needs as long as we can. And I suspect that remote work will be, as in many places, a much more prominent component of our workforce. So officially we're at 50% capacity, but the bioinformatics people some of them want to come in and see each other. Some want to very happy staying away and zooming from their garden and all of that. And for right now, we're being fairly loose, but we're seeing some areas with people who may not be as efficient workers in a remote situation or really ought to be coming in. And we have to, again, ask them to adjust. But I think, again, balancing the real lives of people as they're affected by COVID with our needs as a company, as an organization is something that is a real human resources puzzle, and we work on that one every day. That's a tough one, but we want to be good to our people. We want to respect their needs as we move through this very difficult situation. And that's it.
Okay, thanks, David. Yeah, yes, there's every dish for a different person. Okay, thanks. That concludes this question, and let's go on to our next question. Let me post it to everyone. And this one is an interesting one, right? This pandemic has affected a lot of businesses and it's taking a toll on the economy. Do you see an impact in your field, both good and bad? First one, we have Li Fan. Hopefully he can talk about how that relates to immunology and maybe a little bit of comment on how this affects graduate school, postdocs, and how it compares to previous depression. Or if you haven't experienced the previous depression, maybe just how do you think this economy will affect? Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously, in academia, the biggest things that you care is funding, right? And if you work in the academia, that you worry about whether NIH funding will get affected. If you want to say there's any good thing coming from this, is that now people hopefully will be even more aware of how important biomedical research is, right? So the COVID-19 that we try to develop the vaccine for it, everything related to the infectious disease or anything, people should know that, this is really, really relevant. This is not just some scientists doing crazy experiments, right? This is really affecting our daily life. And I think people should be aware of this, right? But then the impact on economic really will affect the funding, right? So that's the bad thing. And the thing is, if you really look back to the NIH funding, in last 2008, economic crashes, at the time, the funding really get affected 3 years later. Okay, so if you look at the NIH funding pay line, 2008, 2009, 2010 were actually, you don't see a big drop. The lowest point is actually 2011, 2012. So it's too early to say what's going to happen to NIH funding because we just hit with COVID this year. So maybe the pay line, you won't see a huge difference this year, next year, or even 2 years later, but you will see it in 3 years. So that's just unavoidable, because if the economic get hit so hard, it's hard to imagine in the funding will not change, right? But on the other hand, that if you're doing something COVID related, you can probably feel like good about that. You, in terms of funding, it's like you probably will have more funding going to your way. But on the other hand, that could potentially have a bad influence on other biomedical research, right? Because if you only have certain number of money and it go to one direction, other fields are going to get negatively impacted. And it's not just COVID is important, right? Obviously, COVID is important, but there's many different things are also important. And so this is something I do worry about. Is well, people get aware of like how important biomedical science is. I do worry that the funding is going to get affected in general, and also the distribution of the funding is going to get affected quite heavily. That's what I worry about. And in terms of, so that's on the kind of, you can say at the research, like at the laboratory level. In terms of graduate student and postdoc, of course, they are heavily impacted. For example, I just mentioned to you earlier that we have to do this social distancing. We have to keep one person per 250 square feet or per bay. So how can you mentor, supervise junior trainee, right? The young student, the graduate student who join the program, normally they need to take rotation and work with senior people in the lab. How can you do that when you cannot get closer to that person? You are not even allowed to be in the same physical area. And that just makes it so difficult. And of course, we have some way to go around with it, that you have to submit a kind of special approval for this kind of shoulder-to-shoulder training plan. But that's still not convenient, right? So you have to really make sure, whatever, human interaction is really limited to the minimum, and that really makes training difficult. So at the training level, the student, the postdoc, junior student, junior postdoc are going to get affected. At the senior level, the students who are going to graduate and looking for a postdoc position, a postdoc who is going to look for a job, it's going to be affected because, for example, in many universities, they have the hiring freeze. For example, like UCSD, we're having hiring freeze right now. And at the time, I remember we got this email because we did have a ongoing faculty search in the past year, and then we got an email from the university saying, whatever, it doesn't matter, whether we have identified the candidate, if we haven't provided an official written offer, everything needs to be stopped. So then it will be terminated. Unless already offered the written offer, official written offer, then we will complete that. But if we haven't given the official written offer, then it's canceled, right? So you can imagine the postdoc who are looking for job, that's going to be impacted. So definitely, there's a lot of negative impact on the student, the postdoc, as well as the researcher, even though there are good things, as I mentioned earlier. But we can discuss a little bit further later, but I'm just saying, yes, there's a huge impact on the academia research right now.
Great, thanks, Li-Fan. Yeah, that's definitely very serious in academia, and yeah, sad to see that UCSD is doing that at the moment. Jesse, please go ahead and let us know your thought on the impact on biotech in general, or maybe you can talk specifically on kind of antibodies, demand, and all that.
Yeah, so the biotech industry is actually quite wide range of the business. So I can just share on the business like BioLegend is mainly the reagent and tool supplier. Okay? And I mentioned earlier, we do provide critical reagent, not just for research, but also for the diagnostic kit and vaccine research and development. So, but like all business, at the beginning when the pandemic hit in, I would say, early mid-March, our business also seen the similar hit in terms of the revenue. and it really kind of we see kind of hit the bottom in April. Hopefully, it's a true bottom. And on about when you reach the time in May, then we start seeing the revenue start slowly, but starting to climb back. So in early August, we actually see that the number starting to match our 2019 number. Okay, so the bad thing is that the pandemic actually probably wiped out our expected 2020 business growth, but we can see that it's probably going to stabilize and very cautiously stabilized in terms of the similar level to 2019. So this is what we internally call the Nike swish curve sales number. So hopefully we will continue maintain, if not growth beyond the 2019 level. So with that, Biolegend also put into the hiring freeze in March, and then but then because we start seeing this market growth comes back, so we actually start opening up to cautiously hiring people. So there is good, but there is bad. In terms of the Biolegend's business, we are reagent and tool, so we service many different specialty area, right? Including immunology is the big thing, and then but also like neuroscience and stem cell developmental biology, and also the bioprocessing. So I think the market are there. It's just that it probably shift to different focus, especially under the pandemic. So probably all the research, all the money will go into the infectious disease related business, and as the critical raw material reagent tool supplier is applicable for that as well. So I do expect that again we might not see the expected growth, but I think the business is, and the market and the opportunity actually probably will be stabilized to at least to the 2019 level. So that's what more specific towards the Biolegend, like the biotech business.
All right, thanks, Jessie. Very insightful. Well, too bad it's not a V, right? It's more of a Nike swish recovery. So, but that's better than an L. So that's great. Yeah, David, please go ahead and enlighten us about your experience going through two different depression and how this one compared to the previous one, and how does this affect agriculture and planet science field, in your opinion?
Comparing depressions, I don't know if that's really that enlightening. It's too depressing. But I do have a couple of thoughts. I mean, it was mentioned already that there was a delayed effect in 2008. Part of that was because of the stimulus funding that went to NIH and NSF to a lesser extent. Now the government's printed a lot of money recently, but they haven't put too much of it into research. There have been, of course, a lot of investment in vaccines, especially really the output end of the vaccines. So I don't know that we'll see a bump and then a drop like we did before because there's no stimulus. There could still be. I mean, they're still arguing about this, whatever this is, the third or the fourth COVID bill. They're certainly advocating. There's advocates out there for research. We'll see if how that plays out. But it's always hard to get money for research. And if you have a stimulus, your success rate goes from 5% to 10% or 8%. It's always going to be hard to get money. And I think another trend, or I shouldn't say trend, another constant here is that there'll always be trendy research, things that are getting funding, programs that the agencies, whether it's NIH or NSF, sell to Congress, or DOE sell to Congress as something that's important for national security, for the food chain, for obviously for infectious diseases. And there'll be pots of money there. What's going to be harder to do is, as always, is getting money for foundational research. The reason a lot of us got into science. How do things work? What makes organisms tick? And those sorts of basic questions about nature and biology. This is going to be difficult. So I think there'll be research available, in consortia, which are tackling very complex interdisciplinary questions, integrative questions. I think, the traditional single investigator grant is getting harder and harder to find, and it's less and less relevant. So I think, people learning to work as a part of teams, really sharing credit, sharing ideas, and sharing disciplines and understanding different disciplines and why they matter, what people get up in the morning for in ecology or in biochemistry or in bioinformatics. This is really important. So learning broadly about science and how the pieces can fit together, and learning to put forth proposals that are suitably tackling the complex and multidimensional questions of today and tomorrow. This is where the money's going to be. Now, as far as jobs, this is really interesting. So we have some trends that are perhaps balancing each other out in some weird way, the way I look at it anyway. So just to start, we have immigration situation. So the Trump administration, I don't think it's any secret. They're cutting on immigration. They're trying to seal the borders in certain respects. We spend a lot of money on lawyers just trying to keep people at the institute. We hire new faculty recently from Europe, and getting them into America is almost impossible. I mean, it takes a year and a lot of money to attorneys to make that happen. And H-1 visas, there are new rules all the time. It's just more and more hoops to jump through. So immigration is going to make it very difficult for people to come from outside this country to do science, and it's much more difficult than it was. So this is, in a way, a bad way, maybe, but to get opportunities for those of you already in the country, if you have status, to compete for jobs, because there's going to be more demand for domestic talent, if you will. I'm not saying I like that. I'm just saying it's a fact. On the other hand, many universities have hiring freezes. We heard about one, of course, already. And unemployment is high. So generally when unemployment is high and in your sector is, if we say academic sector is exhibiting financial stress, that's not good if you're trying to find a job. On the other hand, the last one, we're talking about remote work. So remote work is something where, you can apply for a job sort of anywhere and perhaps not have to move. So a lot of people have faced we call dual career issues, two body issues, just relocation issues. If you want to be near the family or you need to be near the family, maybe you can think of many more jobs that you would normally not apply for because you can't relocate. Now you don't need to. You're just on the internet. So I see this as a real opportunity for diversity in science, maybe more opportunities for people who traditionally feel shut out because they can't move because of their culture reason or the family reason. So I think there's a number of trends that are going to really stir the pot, and we're going to see a very different sort of employment scenarios going forward. And I'll stop there.
All right, thanks, David. Yeah, it's very interesting how mobility can change from this and the enablement of remote work. Julio, please go ahead and let us know what your thought on how this will impact the startup environment, the biotech real estate, and or the biotech industry in general.
Yeah, I think in the short term, what we're seeing is a lot of companies, as Jesse mentioned, April was what we hope the bottom for a lot of companies. Fortunately, we've been able to navigate that and have no layoffs, at least due to COVID-19. And I think the economic, the local and national governments have done really well to help buoy a lot of companies, offering grants and other relief mechanisms like the PPP and the EDL loans in order to help a lot of the companies stay afloat. I think, on one end, you have, I think 80% of the small businesses saying that if this continues on for several more months, they won't be able to continue themselves. And then on the other hand, you see more IPOs in biotech already here in August than we had in all of 2019. So again, the best year on record if we were measuring biotech as a function of the amount of companies going public. But I think one of the key things that are changing is, and something David said that got me really excited, is that we're in kind of a new era. We've been transitioning to a new era in biotech, this industrial biotech concept where it's not just about the traditional therapeutics, right? It's about getting to market applied biotechnology, right? You hear about the food 2.0 revolution, where you've got companies like Impossible Foods and Memphis Meats and Beyond Meats creating alternatives to meat, right? The TAM of biotech used to be everything in a medicine cabinet. Now it's everywhere around us, right? Biology is really eating the world, and you're seeing a lot of the culture of the industrial biotech now start to spill over into the therapeutics, right? I mean, one of the beautiful things about COVID, if you can, think about things optimistically, are that you're seeing for the first time technologies be unveiled and showcased on the world stage, right? Look at the RNA-based vaccines, right? As the legend has it, Moderna, right, within 40 days was able to come up with a candidate to COVID-19, and now they're already in phase 3 clinical trials. So I think cat's kind of out of the bag in terms of the concept of ideas are worthless and execution's everything. And I think that's what we're really seeing today. We're seeing a shift in mentality of long time horizons to now we got to execute now. If there's a time, we need to start massively paralyzing our resources and collaborating together. And I think that's what we're seeing. COVID really start to accelerate the concept that not only can we push the science faster, but in collaboration with the regulators, try and do things in a balanced way that still keeps safety and efficacy in mind, but also gets us to accelerate the whole operation. So not only are they going in vetting out candidates, but on the other end, you're starting to see bets where they are actually manufacturing some of the starting materials. Should they get the right safety data, they can already start manufacturing, producing vaccines for users. So you're starting to see kind of take hold this revenues-based approach, this sustainability approach that says grants aren't a sustainable way, and we have to start thinking about how we actually operate from the business of science. And so it's pretty cool to see that and see a lot of that changing the landscape of how these companies are operating. I think in the short term, some of the things that are really interesting clues to we're shifting in this direction are, companies are now reaching out saying, hey, I have a lab. I have $1 million, DNA sequencer, heavily invested in some of the analytics infrastructure, GC, mass specs, HPLCs. In addition to my research, now I'm going to go start doing, some service-based work, take on some projects, because maybe there are labs, the scientists would rather, design the experiment, but then send a protocol over to my lab. And, instead of instead of 2 companies and 20 people being in the lab, now it's 1 company, in the lab, and the other one is virtually, submitting the protocols from the couch, but getting the data, right? Having the experiment still ran and getting the data and being able to analyze it. So you're seeing a lot of interesting pushes, and I think it's both the mindset and the cultural changes, and not only the questioning, but now some proof hitting the market that those changes are advantageous to biotech companies. But you're also seeing the technology starting to be embraced. I think before you used to get away saying, technology, those for labs who have a lot of money or for the new kids. Now you can't use that excuse anymore, because often it's the lab that is less intellectually better than you that's getting the market before you, right? And so we're seeing a lot of those changes, and I'm excited to see where those go. I'm excited to see the grad students and postdocs starting to question what happens with the universities. And so I think my own 2 cents of that is figure out something. Don't put your life on pause. There's something you can get out and do right now, right? If you're stuck outside of the U.S. and you can't resume your doctoral program, look, there are labs near you. Figure out how to get involved, right? Whether it's to jump right into the COVID action or to think creatively about how you can contribute and apply the knowledge that you have to do something. So those are my thoughts, Tony.
Yeah, thanks. It's awesome to see. I mean, I see from my end too, like a lot of the bureaucratic process are being like fast tracked, so that's good for advancement of science. And you know, whenever there's a demand shock, such as COVID, there's a lot of opportunities that will open up, and unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of lost opportunities as well. So yeah, so be better to look out for those. We are an hour and 15 minutes into it. I definitely want to leave time for like two questions from the audience, and we will sort them through as we answer the last question. So the last question we have here is more speculative in nature, but yeah, what's your prediction on how the pandemic ends, and are we ever going back to normal? And we will start with Jessie.
So the first question, what is your prediction of how the pandemic ends? Well, I guess the real answer to that, although it may not be very sort of happy answer, is that I don't believe the pandemic will ever end. Right? So it will always be there. If it's not this one, will be the other one. But in terms of COVID-19 disruption, I think we will be able to really manage how to handle in the right direction when the vaccine is become effective and safe vaccine become available, right? So when we will go, then the next one will be, you know, are we ever going back to normal? I think, you know, we'll say there won't be the same as before if you define that as normal. But I would say, you know, we will definitely adapt and get into the new normal, right? New normal means that, like, related to the pandemic, when it never ends, we should just learn what we actually learn what we did right and what we didn't do right, and put the right solution and right practice in place, and then continue practice in the new normal. So I can get into more specific, but I think we already discussed a lot from the previous question and answer to that. So I do believe that we actually learn a lot and we deliver a lot at BioLegend. So give you an example that David kind of mentioned that, yeah, some people just don't feel comfortable to go back to work. But like I said, when BioLegend first defined as essential business and being fully operational, especially for the laboratory, manufacturing, and logistic people, and have to say, you know, at the beginning, a step that does have some concern, but after a month working in the campus with a strong support and investment from the organization, our strong commitment to the safe campus, I do feel like people right now has been adapt to the new norm and feel quite, relative speaking, quite comfortable working in the campus. And people are start coming back. And the initial feedback for the people who coming back to the campus and practice the new normal procedure actually have a positive feedback on that. So so the answer, you know, in conclusion is I don't think the pandemic is going to end. However, in relate to the COVID-19, I think vaccine will be the solution. And are you saying, are we ever going back to the normal? We were never going back to the before. But I do feel like within the BioLegend's experience, I think we are already adapting into the new normal. Yeah.
All right, thanks, Jessie. David, please go ahead. And let's try to keep the response, like, let's say 2 minutes, just so we have enough time for a question and answer from the audience. Thanks.
Okay, yes, I'll keep it quick. I do see there's already something in the Q&A along these lines. I would say that, you know, the pandemic, you know, yes, it will end, you know, in a medical sense, but it will cast a very long shadow for many years. And anybody old enough to remember 9/11 knows what that's like, or even 2008. There's the economic shock, tremendous economic shock. Those things don't go away, and you're not immune from them just because you happen to be a scientist. Distrust across borders. Countries have worked together productively and also very counterproductively, especially there's some countries that have been isolationist. And I think, that kind of distrust, when the world needs to work together and you set yourself apart, that has maybe a decades-long effect. So international relations are going to be never going to be what they were. I mean, it'll take many, many years for those strains to ease, and new bonds have already formed between countries. Alliances have shifted. Again, you're not immune because you're a scientist. There are fewer restaurants. Many businesses, small business, close forever. People will probably try to open different kinds of businesses, more remote, ones that are less dependent on real estate. Many companies are not renting office space. People are moving out of cities at an incredibly rapid pace, and they're not going back. So we're seeing a reordering of society that, is not, you're not immune to that because you're a scientist. People are traveling to different places. Meetings will probably be in more remote locations, even though like Gordon conferences already are. But the lure of big cities may have dimmed for many people. So I think, research, there'll always be love for science. People are going to be drawn to the unknown. So that will stay normal, that people are curious about nature, curious about how to harness information, discoveries to make a society a better place. So I think that's the thread that's going to keep running through science, but I think the world around us has changed forever.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, David. Okay, Julio, please share your thought on this.
Sure. Hey, Tony, I think I'm going to echo a lot of sentiment here where I don't think it ever ends. I don't think any crisis or any setback ever ends, right? I think, someone told me there was nearly 50 recessions we've had since the U.S. was born as a nation. So I think what we've learned to deal with is, continuous change and adaptability. And I think that's really where we're heading. And I think a lot of what David covered is, we will head into a world where people are going to be thinking about doing work differently. I think our industry is a really interesting one. I think our industry will probably be a counter of a lot of those changes that will form around our society in terms of, I think we are one of the industries where real estate will probably start to boom. Although my short-term advice, do not go get into a lab lease right now. Hold off, or if you are in one, start negotiating half off right now because they're lucky enough to have tenants in there. And the reason why I say that is because I think the real estate side is going to be changing. I think traditionally it's been thought about in terms of square foot and horizontal, like any other land play. And I think now we're talking about, if just in the conversation today, right, to keep people safe, we're doing shifts, right? And so I think a lot of what you're going to see in terms of the infrastructure of biotech is you're going to see a lot of thinking vertically, right? Time sharing. How do we have, multiple shifts so we can get, the same productivity with a third of the people at any given time, right? And you're going to see, collaboration. I no longer need to build $1 billion campus where I house my R&D and my variants for the animal studies and where I'm going to produce my vaccines. Now you're going to see more and more collaboration and virtualization and fragmentation of a lot of these components, but with the technology to massively put them all back together project by project. So I think that's the new normal we're going towards. And again, I think one of the things that's key is we just don't know, right? We just don't know how things are going to evolve. But I think that we have learned a few things that give me hope in terms of what to do in the short term, right? I think, the virology community, when they were predicting what a pandemic would look like, I think they all had, bird flu, right? It was going to be somehow related to that. And all of a sudden it was one of the COVID that got us, right? And so just thinking through those, and I think you're seeing vaccines change from eggs to these new technologies. And I think that's great. And that's going to have an everlasting impact. And I think a lot of the world's governments are going to be thinking about how susceptible our economies have been to a pandemic and really taking that seriously and starting to treat almost how we have with agriculture, where we put, seeds in vaults, really now starting to proactively, preempt the next pandemic and make some investments into there. So I think, in the short term, we're not going to have, a short memory on that. And I think you're going to see some more national infrastructure And I'm optimistic that we cut some of the vaccine nationalism nonsense that's starting to emerge, and hope that we start to think more as a global community. And my hope is that a lot of the virtualization and the shift towards that starts to really make people not only think but act like a global community, because that's what this pandemic has shown us, if anything, right? I mean, for God's sakes, New Zealand has COVID outbreaks, right? There's no safe haven, and so if you think that the plan and strategy is put your head in the sand, it just doesn't work. We are a global community, and will continue to be affected by the way the world operates in any corner of this world, and so we've got to help each other out in that way. And those who have less resources, I really hope, as one of the more fortunate nations with our resources and our wealth, I hope we also take that in consideration as we think about what that new normal looks like, is to be more inclusive of the companies that can't. And so I hope the distributions of the vaccines reflect that as well, not just who can afford it, but really from a needs-based mechanism, and a smart one, right? How do we heal as a global community should be how we think about this vaccine, and I think at least how we end this pandemic and then move into the long term.
Yep. I think that is very crucial for for the U.S. to realize it needs to have a local supply of various different medical equipments. Well, luckily we didn't have any food shortage, so that's good. Although I have a couple of weeks really hard to get potatoes, but other than that, I don't have any issues. Li Fan, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I think this two question essentially is one question, because I feel like the question is how the pandemic ends. I think if you mean the pandemic ends by meaning the virus will disappear, I don't think that will not be the case. For me, when the pandemic ends, is more like when we can coexist with them. So it's kind of the normal, right? So what we say, how we define normal. I think we evolve, right? Not just genetically, but socially, or everything that we do, things we change, we adapt to whatever environment that we live in. For example, wearing masks used to be very, very weird in US. Coming from Taiwan, people wear masks all the time, so that's not a weird thing to have. But if you tell me 6 months ago that people wearing masks on the street in US and people don't think that's crazy, that's obviously you couldn't imagine, right? But right now, wearing masks is become something that people get used to it, and it's just like what we have in Taiwan. So we evolve. It means that the way that we interact, the way we live, we change because whatever we experience, and that's evolution, not necessarily happening genetically, right? So once you get to the point, socially people evolve, or medical infrastructure improve to the point that we can live rather normally, right? So we can have our daily life, we can do things rather normally, and even though the virus is still there, people still get infected. Because I don't think vaccine will be, people will say once the vaccine becomes available, we can go back to normal. But that's a very wishful thinking, right? So because vaccine is not going to get rid of the virus. Also, you also have to think about the concern about having vaccine developed so fast, because usually vaccine it's not being developed in such a short term. And right now, since this COVID is so serious, we push this vaccine development faster and faster, and perhaps a lot of safety measurement also has been changed just because we want to have the vaccine faster. So there are going to be people worried about how safe those vaccine is going to be because we get it so fast. So even the typical anti-vaccine people, right? The anti-vaccine people will never want to take vaccine. But even regular people that usually will have their kids, have themselves taking the vaccine, will have doubt when the vaccine becomes available. That should I be the guinea pig, right? Should I want to be the first set of people taking that vaccine? who knows what's going to happen? Because as immunologists, we always understand this potential disadvantage or advantage of any vaccine, right? Any pros and cons, anything. There's the whatever the vaccine you have that can give you the strong immune response. Usually, that come with a concern of that can make the disease worse, can have some issue related to this vaccine. So we are aware of this. And that's why to develop a vaccine, it's not just to make sure it's effective, but also you have to make sure it's safe. And right now, this may be, the safety issue may be kind of put on side a little bit, and that could be a potential issue when the vaccine becomes available. So that's why I don't think the pandemic will end just because the vaccine becomes available. I think it will end when we find a way to live with it. And that means that the way we interact, the way that we do things on a daily basis, also the medical infrastructure that are there to prepare for whatever, people with more critical condition that can be taken care of, and combined with people know how to treat with it better right now, wearing masks or keep certain way of living to reduce the amount of the people that have critical conditions. So together, then we'll get to the point that we can still do our things normally, right? So I think that's how the pandemic will end, and I think that's the time when we're living a normal life.
All right, I am excited to get back to a normal life, but still I'll wait patiently until a good vaccine comes out. So let's get straight to the attendees' questions. Comparing previously working on site totally and current combination of working on site and remote, do you observe any differences regarding employee performances, work efficiency, and goal achievement? I think this is pretty broad since a lot of you have like reports, but just keep it brief. Yeah. We will start with David.
Yeah, I already answered this question a few minutes ago in the Q&A box, but it's a very short answer. I'll just read it for people who haven't been in there. I wrote, what I worry most about is the lack of chance interactions that often lead to innovation, whether in research or research support functions. Also, some people have poor internet bandwidth and cannot effectively work from home. Some people, on the other hand, are more efficient. They are prone to distractions and have fewer at home. So I think overall, I would say productivity is suffering, and it's a time bomb. But some people cope better than others. It's also a generational thing. It's complicated, but I'd say overall, it's probably not good.
Thanks, David. Julio?
Yeah, so, I'll talk. Yeah, hey, Tony, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
So I'll talk to this a little bit personally about our company. So for us during the pandemic, I'm the CEO of the company, right? So wanting to really, be sensitive to everyone's a human being, right? So for us, one of the things that was important to us is communication, right? And so early on during the pandemic, what I basically told our team was, look, if you need to take time off to take care of a family member, right? We were having lockdowns in other countries. We have a global workforce. So in other countries, right, they actually by alphabetical order of the last name could only go to their local grocery store to shop one day a week, right? And so when it came to doing work, what we said is everything you can do at any given time, try and get it done then, and design the day around how you need to take care of yourself and your family first. And so, first thing was first, right? Making sure they understood what was the most important. And then also, when they do decide to show up for work, right? For us, it's something that we take as a privilege that people are choosing, to come into work at LabFellows to help our customers figure out solutions to how they're going to get in the lab, how they're going to operate. We help support some of the logistics, like putting purchases through as well with some of our resources. And so, really, how do we help those companies? And for them to come in and put their time in and punch the time clock is a big deal. And so we honor that with what I said earlier. And so when they do that, a lot of them, they value it because it's a distraction from what's going on in life, right? But again, we still value it because at the end of the day, they can be working on, the bomb out shelter, right? They can be figuring out how to, grow the greenhouse in the garage, all kinds of things. And instead they're spending their day invested in helping move the company forward and helping us survive and help our customers. And I think the biggest thing that we did culturally as well was really continue to talk about how we were helping our customers, both how we were directly and indirectly through helping our customers making a difference in COVID, whether it was helping the visibility on the supply chain constraints, whether it was being involved with helping matchmake someone who was trying to find a PCR machine or access to a BSC, right? Because those were constrained and everyone was trying to do a lot of the cell culturing or rapid tests and trying to validate some of those diagnostics. So what we did was we put visibility. There's a lot of negativity out there, right? And so we did as a company as much as we could to feed the good news and how we were directly making an impact in our customers' lives and in the overall community. So that's how we really work with our team to talk about things and get their hearts and minds in the right directions and support them while they're working from home or on site. And then as I said, they were thrilled being able to develop a lot of the technology that contributed to their own efficiencies as well as their customers. And I think that's allowed us to really achieve our goals. I would say during COVID, we've actually outpaced most of our goals. We've been very cautious to make sure people weren't doing that by putting in 60-hour work weeks. But I think it's allowed them to really focus and get things done and some of the typical distractions you might have in the day-to-day office. But again, like David's mentioned, we are conscious about still wanting to have a balance of serendipity and serendipitous collisions, right? Having those water cooler conversations do lead to innovation. So we've been careful to make sure that we kind of staged impromptu opportunities internally and externally just to have conversations and share different ideas about what's going on.
Okay, thanks, Julio. Since we're running short on time, I'll just go ahead and go to the next question, and I'll have Li Fan and Jesse answering that, just so that we can, not finish too late. So the next question, do you think this pandemic will permanently change how people interact with each other, job market, whole environment? What do you imagine the future society, job market, and environment will be like? Li Fan, please take it away.
Yeah, like the answer I gave in the last question, I certainly believe that we will change the way we interact with people. We will change the way we live. Like I said, wearing masks is one example. Right now, wearing masks in U.S., people won't think you are a freak, and just it's going to be different. And so on the other hand, also people will appreciate a lot of things that we take it for granted in the past, right? So I think people will appreciate more about the personal interaction that before people don't understand. I mean, you see everybody every day, you think that's just a given, right? But right now, since we all stay at home or have to separate from each other due to the social distancing guideline, right now people miss interacting with people more, and that you appreciate what you have before. At the same time, learning how to live in a new way. For example, in terms of what I said, what we do in the lab right now, we plan experiment weekly, and you really try to learn how to be more efficient, more organized with the limited time that you have. Because right now you stay at home, you need to take care of your kids. You have limited time that you can work in the lab, so you learn new ways to do things. At the same time, you appreciate something that you took it for granted in the past. So I think that would definitely affect how we interact with each other, how we live our normal life. But at the same time, in terms of job market, the whole environment, again, I think, in terms of job market, this is probably other people will have a better answer. I don't necessarily think in terms of academia is going to change in terms of job market. We're still looking for the best person when we want to search for new faculty. So I don't think just because having this pandemic it will change this. But I don't know in other like for example biotech industry whether that will change. And in terms of whole environment, as I said, I think everything will adapt to the new normal. That's my answer.
Thanks, Li Fan. Yeah, Tracy, so you're the last one, so please go ahead.
Yeah. So I think the human beings are social animals. So I think the nature how people interact or how they need to interact or how they want to interact, different purpose for social purpose or for professional purpose, is not going to change. I think people will become more creative, or the technology be more advanced because they have to serve the nature of the need of people interact, right? So I don't think that the nature of the need, how people interact will change, but the approach will be different, right? So that's will be my feedback on that. So the approach will be different, but the nature will remain the same. Regarding what, in terms of the job market, I think this is a very big question. That the only answer I think I will give is the focus, the application area will be different. But I think in general, whatever opportunity present for that at that timely need on the application will be the key, right? So like what I say earlier, and probably kind of echo what David kind of mentioned earlier, that the basic research science will be the key. If you're strong on that, and then keep in mind that how you can apply it into the real application and the fashion application, that will be the key. So I don't think the job market size or opportunity would significantly be impact. It's how you apply what you have and then match the market need. This will be the key. So hopefully I answered that question.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of unknowns going forward, and yeah, thank you. Thanks everyone for joining the webinar, and thank you for all the speakers and the attendees for staying over time. This will be it. Thank you so much. I'll stop broadcasting.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.